Welcome back, this is Refit and Sail and this is Project Lottie. If you saw my earlier video, you'll know that the boat has a somewhat osmotic bottom. I've been over the boat with a moisture meter because those blisters were a bit of a worrying sign, and she is very, very damp on the bottom. So she's going to get an osmosis treatment while she's with me. The first step in doing that is to remove the seacocks, because I need to get the hull peeled, and I don't really want to be peeling around the seacocks. I know that can be done and some people do that. Certainly it was done to my westerly over there some time ago, and when I ended up removing some of those seacocks I found blisters underneath them, so that's really a bit of a bodge. So the first job is to remove the seacocks, and then she's going to get lifted up onto some slightly higher blocks in the cradle later this week, and then I can start the peel. Here are some of those blisters I was talking about. The light just catches them. Some of them are relatively small, others are getting on for the size of a 50p piece. There's one there, I don't know if the light's going to pick it up, but there's the size of my thumb. It's kind of a shallow one, that one, but wider. Others are much smaller but more pronounced, so there's a pretty big one there that's way bigger than my thumb. If I hold my thumb up against it, you get an idea of the size. So we've got to get that peeled and dried, but first job is to remove these seacocks. Contessas normally have Blake's seacocks, but this one has had the Blake's removed and replaced with slightly more modern valves, so ball valves on the inside and these skin fittings. So I'm going to whip these out. Unfortunately they're probably absolutely fine. If we stick new ones in at the end of the project, then the owner can have some peace of mind knowing that they are all good. The other thing I need to do is remove the anodes. Now, when I did my walk around in an earlier video, I only saw one anode and I commented on how big it was, and actually this boat has two, identical. There's the one on the port side, there's the one on the starboard side. I've never seen a Contessa with two anodes, and I've never seen a Contessa with anodes of that size. It's the kind of thing you'd see on the back of a large motorboat or maybe even a fishing boat, but for some reason they're on this little dainty Contessa, so I think we're going to do something better with that. These are the seacocks I've just pulled out. They're not all the seacocks, I've got two more left to go, which are the cockpit drains. I will get round to them once I have a suitable piece of hose just to extend the cockpit drain down and out of the boat, because I don't want to fill the boat up with water. But what's interesting on these is the wall thickness. If we compare them, this one here is the toilet outlet. It has really nice thick walls on the through hull. This one is a sink outlet, much the same. This one is much the same. They're 1/2 inch. Whereas if we look at these ones, which are 3/4 inch, the wall thickness is very, very thin indeed. I'm guessing that's probably no more than about 1 mil of thickness. Whereas if you look up here, there's kind of 3 mils probably of material there. So much, much stronger. There's no maker's name on any of these. There's also no indication that they are DZR or corrosion resistant, so it's a bit of an unknown. They may have come from a plumber's merchant, they may have come from a chandlery, who knows. There is a maker's mark on those. I'd be surprised if someone has fitted these and not put corrosion resistant fittings in, but it does happen occasionally. I've also now removed the fittings for the anodes. Remember, it had those massive anodes on it. So these are really quite nice stainless steel studs, and there's nothing wrong with them. So I'm going to stick them in a locker, and I can refit these once all the work on the bottom is done. Contessa 32s have a skeg hung rudder, and it has a bottom plate or a heel plate that is accessible only by removing the skeg cap, which sounds horrible, and the first time you do it, it probably feels pretty horrible cutting into your boat, but it's actually pretty simple and safe. You just need to work out where you need to cut, and then you can do it. I normally do it with the hacksaw. It's really easy. Some people take angle grinders and other things to it, but it's unnecessary. Hacksaw allows you to feel when you've cut through the filler and what have you, and the bulk that's holding that skeg cap on, and once you get most of the way through, you can give it a little light tap and it will just then pop off, which makes accessing the bolts or the screws underneath really easy. Now, because I'm working on my own, I normally have to drop rudders on my own, but it's actually fairly easy if you run a rope from up on deck underneath the rudder and then back up the other side. You can support the weight of the rudder, back off all the screws that hold the heel plate in place. Then you can go up to the top and remove the top boss, the bit the tiller goes onto. The rudder will then drop down slightly and just hang on that rope. You'll see it in a minute in the video. I can then come down back under the boat and slowly lower that rudder out of its bearings. Working on old boats is a little bit like archaeology, or maybe boating archaeology, because you kind of go through various different layers of repairs and changes that have been made over the years. Obviously the boat was originally built and some of the things will have been changed over time and some things haven't, and then you're trying to work out what has changed or why something has happened. So I'll take you for a little tour and I'll show you what I mean on some of the stuff on the bottom. Here's a little patch of the hull. I wanted to see what was going on underneath the copper coat on an area without blisters, so I just scraped the copper coat back, and I was expecting to see a area of epoxy under there, because most boats, or many boats, have been epoxy coated to try and stop osmosis from occurring, just to increase the water permeability of the coatings on the bottom. And this was straight onto the laminate, so it's not really a surprise after nearly 50 years that this boat has succumbed to a degree of osmosis. The stern tube back here is also another area which is a kind of a common issue as the boats have gotten older. Originally this would have been a bronze stern tube, and in fact I looked at this and I thought this wasn't original, even though it was a slightly unusual shape, because they're normally flat on the end if it's an original one. But the problem is the bonding between the bronze and the GRP hull breaks down over time, particularly if you've had the prop waggling around a little bit, maybe with a loose bearing slightly. It slowly loosens down the bonding and it fails. And there's also a void up here in the skeg, which can, if the bonding fails here, slowly fill up with water. Of course the bonding can also fail on the inboard end as well, so water can track back down. And there's some telltale signs here that even though this one has actually been replaced, and I can see the evidence of that inside, water is getting into and slowly seeping out of that void there. You can see water staining there that's been trickling out since the boat's been ashore. There's also a little bit of evidence of water coming out of here. So the hull's made in two halves, and there's a join here, and you can see it's slightly damp. If the weather got a bit hotter, it would warm everything up, and it actually forces a little trickle of water out of here. So I think what we're going to be doing as part of the project is pulling that old stern tube out and then seeing if we can dry out the void, which is kind of up there. It's a foam filled void normally, so I will see how wet it is, but it might dry naturally with the stern tube out and leaving it for a couple of months, or it might be I cut an access hatch inside the boat down into the void and dig out the void and then completely dry it before refilling it with foam and sealing everything up again. here's the rudder. It actually isn't in bad condition. I've seen much worse. You quite often get little cracks along the leading edge along here, just where the molds start to, the two sides of the mold start to separate a little bit. There's some evidence of that possibly down there, so I might be doing a little bit of rudder repair on this one. Problem is, it is wet. It is very wet, but a lot of them are wet, the rudders on these boats, and rudders generally do tend to get wet because keeping the water out of them is not an easy job. So because they're waterlogged, you effectively have water on both sides of the skin. So having an osmotic rudder is very common, even if the hull is absolutely fine. So I've got to decide how much effort is worth putting into trying to dry this rudder, or whether we just accept that it is going to continue as a wet waterlogged rudder. The other option, of course, is to fit a new one, but I will discuss that with the owner. And I don't see any point in necessarily throwing out a perfectly good rudder, even if it is a little bit waterlogged. To get the stern tube out, the first thing I've got to do is remove the prop shaft. And that means lots of time up this slightly grotty old quarterboard. So up here, I get to work through that little kind of letterbox size opening. It is less than a handspan if I do that. So you can see what I'm up to. There's the Yanmar 2GM, there's the back end of it, so I've got to release those very rusty bolts holding the prop shaft into the gearbox on the coupling there, and then I can remove that fairly modern looking water-fed dripless seal. There's an electro eliminator thing on there as well, so got to take that off, and then hopefully with a bit of persuasion we can get that prop shaft out and then the stern tube out. So this is a fun one I've just discovered, and if you look down there, I've just pulled the stern gland off the stern tube, and you can see the prop shaft is actually running against the side of the stern tube, which is not ideal. So I imagine that was fairly noisy. Now I know boats do change shape very slightly when they come ashore or go back into the water, but I would expect that prop shaft to be fairly central in the stern tube, not running as it is like that well off to one side. Not ideal, but never mind, it's all fixable. Successfully got the prop shaft out, but you can see here where the prop shaft has been rubbing against that stainless steel shaft tube, and it's removed quite a bit of material actually. You can feel the grooves there with my thumb. So I'm back on the stern tube today. This is the outer end, obviously. I have cut away the sealant that was all around here yesterday, and I've managed to get it to move a little bit. On the inside I've removed the GRP bonding that is just onto the tube there as well with my oscillating tool. So the inside bit is definitely moving, the outside bit moves a little bit, and I'm hoping that with my slide hammer I'll be able to pull the thing out, because that's the way I have done it in the past. Here's my slide hammer. It was made for me by a good friend, and I had to stop yesterday because I didn't have the right size fitting to go in the stern tube at the inboard end. So I had this machined up, so that's going to locate on the inside of the stern tube inside the boat, and then I can use this hefty weight here to hopefully whack the stern tube out of the boat. So my first attempt with the slide hammer wasn't very successful. It just wouldn't shift it at all. So I'd noticed previously there were two threaded fixings of some sort that have been welded to this plate, and I assumed that there wasn't anything on the back of them because I couldn't see how it would be possible to put a nut or something on the inside, because you can't get inside the skeg to do so. But I thought, well, there's no harm in grinding and then drilling those out just to see if that is going to help it. So I'm going to have another go now with the slide hammer and see if it now shifts. It's possible that they were just for locating it, but they could have been put in with some resin, and the resin is holding onto the thread that's been welded onto the back of that plate. So we shall see if I'm more successful this time. house working. There's a joke here about me banging away on her back hole, but I'm too much of a grown-up to go there. She goes. Lottie is going off to the slings because I need to get her slightly higher in the cradle on some bigger blocks under the keel, and while I'm at it I'm going to remove a rubbing strip that's been attached to the bottom of the keel because we don't need that. I'm going to delete that, fill the holes. Unfortunately the weather today is awful, so I'm hiding in the van in between very heavy showers. I'm working down here. So on the bottom of the keel there's this stainless steel bar that's been attached, and we want to take that off and repair what's going on underneath it. There's a little bit of damage at the back of the keel there. I'm under the boat now because I can't put the peeling off any locker. I've had all the seacocks out, I've done all the bits and pieces that I need to do ready for peeling the hull. The sun has come out, which is nice because it was raining about 10 minutes ago, and so I'm going to go and make a lot of noise and a fair amount of dust, I expect. I'll show you the equipment I'm going to be using. So here's my gel plane, my peeler. So that has some spinning blades on the front of it, which I run down the hull, which takes a kind of 2-inch strip each time I run down the hull. That's connected via vacuum to this big dustbin bucket thing. It has one of those centrifugal dust collector things, so all the grot goes into there, and that's connected to my vacuum cleaner over there. Very exciting. So most of the stuff will go up the vacuum, but I still need to wear a mask because a little bit escapes and blows around. As you go over some of the blisters, some of them really do pop and spurt. There's one here where you can see the blister's been building within the laminate there, and slowly it's getting bigger and bigger and pulling the laminate apart, which is what happens unfortunately if you get the blisters into the laminate. Sometimes they're just under the gel coat and sometimes they're a bit further into the laminate, and those people that say that osmosis never sank a boat, well, it kind of sinks its value because slowly it degrades the laminate structural integrity. So so if you have osmosis, yes, you can ignore it for a while, but you can't ignore it forever. Being some nice blisters, you can see these little bits here were blisters, and as you go over them you get a bit of moisture out of them as you run the peeler over. They will need opening up, so the next stage after I've done the peel, I'm going to get this all just flatted down with the sander, but I need to get these all these little voids opened up, and I'll do that with a media blast. So next step after flattening it down is get it all media blasted. That will open up anything that needs to be opened up, and then the drying can really start in earnest. But some of these blisters were quite impressive actually. and you can see the laminate damage where the osmotic pressure has been pulling the laminate apart. So I'd say we caught this one in time. There's not major issues here, but some of these blisters definitely were of a size where they were starting to do proper damage to the laminate. There are some little areas I'm going to have to do by hand, so you can see the bottom of the keel here. I can't get the peeler in underneath there, so I'll just use I've got to do the back of the keel as well. I'll use my little belt sander to get in there and basically remove as much material as the peeler removed, but just kind of do it by hand with the belt sander, and then we'll be all good. There is a bit of damage at the front of the keel. It's obviously had a knock at some point, but that's fairly common. You can see there's an old repair there, and in fact it's an old repair which might need a bit of further repair work, but I'll have a proper look at it once the whole thing's peeled. Here's the business end of the peeler. You see it's got these little blades, so there's two there and there's another two there, and it's collected all this kind of goo. This is the stuff that comes out of the laminate when you're going over all those wet blisters, and it collects a little bit on the cutters. And it's also an incredibly noisy machine, so it's full earplugs as well as face mask and eye protection and coverall and everything doing this job. Progressing well with the peeling. Here I can show you the three stages. So there's the copper coat that's unpeeled, and then I'm taking about a mil, maybe slightly more off that, and you end up with a slightly kind of stripy surface where there are some little stringy bits left over. And when that's all done, we end up sanding it, and I've got my helpful weekend assistant with me, and we buzz over it with sander with 40 grit on it, and we end up with a surface that looks kind of like that, so pretty smooth and ready to be media blasted. And the media blasting will open up all the little voids and other bits and pieces that we want opened up in the hull, so it can then be washed many times. There's my assistant doing a fine job. Right, I better go and do some work. I stuck a screwdriver up that lower hole earlier and just waggled it about, and suddenly a load of water appeared. So it's still draining down slowly, all the water that's in the void up in the skeg there. The bit that's more concerning is right underneath the front of the keel. You can see there's a few cracks there and some filler that doesn't look particularly well adhered. So I think I might have to have a bit of a poke around to see what's going on there. I can see a repair needed in the near future once I've dried everything out, and before I relaminate and finish off the hull. That's going to need a little bit of attention. If you're wondering how I do under the pads, this is how. So I got the yard to stick in a couple of temporary props, and then we can take down the cradle pad and I can get in there quite easily. So I'm just doing one corner at a time at the moment. You can see as the boat's warming up, all these little bits of moisture coming out of the laminate. You see that there? All the little pores that have been opened up, and wet's coming out. So that's good, starting to dry already. Slightly wet day here, unfortunately, on the handle, but Lottie's getting tinted up, as you can see, just to contain all the mess and the muck, because I need to get a media blasted just to open up all the voids and little blisters in the hull. There's Tony's van. Tony from Master Blast. If you need to get your antifoul removed, he's the man to use. He's very good and very clean and a nice guy. Just come in to have a quick look, and you can see what it looks like if you get in close. There's all these tiny little voids have all been opened up by the media blasting, which is exactly what we want. And in fact, as I was walking around, I could see blobs of moisture coming out of the voids that have been opened. So it's done its job. Just pulled out very easily a lump of filler there that was just squished in, and there's a hole, and I think this is the resin that is on the inside of the GRP skin that the keel, the lead ingot, is dropped down into. So that's less than ideal. There's not a lot of material left there. I think there's going to be a fair amount of grinding back needed, because that doesn't sound as solid as that. So that's all going to have to get ground back. And I think there's probably an area there that's getting on for, I don't know, 10 inches where the GRP needs to be ground back, removed and replaced. I might need to have a little look to see what's going on under there as well, because this doesn't look brilliantly adhered, this repair that's been done. I mean, it's all perfectly fixable, but I just thought, now that the bottom's been media blasted, it was worth having a little look to see what's going on down there, because I've just pressure washed all the hull and I can pressure wash it again, but it might be worth grinding this back and pressure washing again, just so that it can dry as much as possible underneath all this slightly damaged laminate, and then I can rebuild it from there. I decided I'd do a little bit of an exploratory grind back with the angle grinder with a flap disc on it, just because I wanted at the very least to open up what was going on down here. So that hole there, you can see, is just a chunk of resin that fell out, and you can see the GRP skin around it. So what's happened is that GRP skin has been somewhat shattered by an impact, and it's the same back here. And well, I'm going to have to fill that hollow in and then rebuild the skin on the bottom of the keel here. So it looks nasty. It's actually not too difficult a repair. Here at the back you can see it's a funny shape as well. I think I pointed it out earlier, but again, I've had a bit of a grind. It's probably difficult to see with the camera, but that there is the lead. So the way they build these boats is they have the hull all laid up, and then they mix up a load of resin with chopped strands in it, and then they drop the lead down into the bottom of the keel, and that works generally pretty well, unless you have a big grounding and the bottom of the keel gets it. So I've got to do the front repair and a little one at the back as well. If you look closely, you'll see there's a whole bunch of numbers on the bottom of the boat now. So what I can do now is I have a baseline from which to compare moisture meter readings going forward as I dry her out. With the boat now in a position where it's drying, I'm going to call this enough for this particular video. Thank you very much for watching. If you've liked this sort of content, please do hit the like button and the subscribe button, because then you'll see my future videos as they get posted. So in the next videos you'll see this getting washed and then ultimately dried out with some heat and vacuum pads that I use for drying the laminate. And then I've got loads of other work to do on this boat, so keep tuned, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.